Hey guys, Christina here, and today I have a look and a review of the books that we read in October 2019. We have 5 children, currently 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, and we also homeschool. So we do have books that correspond with school and books that we're just reading as well, and some audiobooks. So I'm going to go ahead and start with our read alouds. Most of our read alouds fit with our Story of the World Volume 3 that we're doing this year. I'll put a link up top if you want to go and see the curriculum we're using. So the first book is The Adventures of Philippe, A Story of Old Quebec, written by Gwendolyn Bowers, and this is part of the Good and the Beautiful library. I was so excited when I found this book and when I found out they were bringing this story back, because trying to find stories and books about Canada can be a little difficult sometimes, and because it took place kind of like right around the time we were learning about, it just seemed a perfect fit. It's a reading level 5. It's about 120 pages. It's a slower story for sure. It definitely has some historical relevance to it, kind of explaining things like once winter came, they didn't get any ships, which meant, they didn't get supplies, but they didn't get news or letters as well. It's about a boy who is on his way to Quebec from France, and he ends up getting off the ship he was supposed to be on and then getting on a different ship to come, and then he can't find his father and kind of what happens during that story. Excuse me. So it was a good story. It was a good read. One thing about it really bothered me though. I'm going to get my soapbox for a second. Sometimes books that are older, they have language in them that we don't use today, which I try and look books up ahead of time. I try and read reviews and be prepared if that's going to happen, because it does happen, and then we can have a discussion about it with my kids. This one didn't have any reviews online because it had just been brought back into print by this company. And they have slightly edited some of the books to make them fit with their good and beautiful values. If you have a look inside this book, you can see it says the unabridged version has updated grammar and spelling, and 2 sections that contain mythical magic have been removed from this version. So I was really, really surprised and disappointed when they kept the word savages in the book, referring to the First Nations in the area. I think it was the Hurons and the Iroquois in these books. And I just felt like if they were editing it and marketing it as good and beautiful, that word should not have been kept in there. So just a word of caution, if you are going to read this book, be prepared for a discussion about that word. Just be prepared. Otherwise, it was a good story, and again, went right along with our Story of the World. So the next book we read was Tiktalik Talk by James Houston. And we've read a few James Houston books, and it's the same type of story. Very simple, very basic, adventurous, about a young boy. My kids really liked it. I really liked it. It's a book that I'm going to try and find a copy of to add to our personal library, because I just really enjoyed it. It gave a lot of information about kind of survival and courage and what life was like at that time. It takes place somewhere in Canada, my guess is around the Hudson's Bay area, where a boy who's out hunting, the weather has not been as cold that year, and so food is not as plentiful, and he's out hunting and he ends up getting on an ice floe and being taken out to sea, and the story of what happens. James Houston just has a great style. We really enjoy it. So that was a good book. And then we read Escape Across the Wide Sea, and that one is by Catherine Kirkpatrick. This is a fairly new book, so there weren't a lot of reviews about it, but I really enjoyed it. It begins in France during King Louis, I want to say the 14th. Hopefully I'm right. When he tells anyone who is not Catholic they need to convert to being Catholic. And it talks about the Huguenots and the family that leaves to try and escape the persecution and this kind of forced conversion. And as they're leaving, kind of some mix-ups happen. And they end up, instead of going to England, they end up on a ship to like the Caribbean, and it's a slave ship. So this book talks about the Huguenots and about the exodus of the Huguenots, but also about slavery. And so those were two chapters that were kind of right beside each other in Story of the World, so the book fit perfectly. It is descriptive. It does give real information about some of the treatment of the slaves. And I pre-read parts of the book. I had trouble finding a book that would work for us to read. Those are my kids making noise in the basement. About slavery. There were a couple I read and I felt like it was just too much for my younger children. This one I felt was okay. It was a good amount of kind of truth, but in a more gentler form. Once they get to colonies in the Caribbean, they end up going up to America and settling in a new colony in that area, and just about the struggles and kind of what life was like at that time, and like things like swearing allegiance to a new country because they were in British territory then, and very interesting. It's another book I'm going to try and get a copy of for myself because I think it's one that we're going to read multiple times as my children get older and these topics come up again and again. And then finally, the last one we read was called Shipwrecked, the true adventure of a Japanese boy. And it's by Rhonda Bloomberg. And I'll put a picture in. It's a larger book. It looks like a picture book, but it's not. It's like a novel, basically. And it's about the story of Manjiro, is how I pronounced it, who during the isolated time in Japan ends up getting caught up in a storm as he's a fisherman and taken beyond Japanese waters, basically, and is picked up by an American whaling ship. He's taken to the US. He eventually tries to return to Japan, but returning means death, basically. Any foreigner is basically killed because of this time of isolation in Japan's history. And it was so fascinating to read this man's life, and it's based on a true story. The book has some made-up facts, but some of it is historically accurate based on accounts. He does end up going to Japan many years later, and he plays a role in the opening of Japan's borders once again. What an incredible, incredible person's life. It just blows me away that a person's life could be so amazing and affect so many people. He was just, I think, 14 when he was lost at sea. Really good book, interesting book, and again, goes along with the time period of Japan's isolation if you're looking for a historical book. So then, we did audiobooks. So we finally finished, it took us so long, Hans Brinker or the Silver Skates by Mary Maples Dodge. I talked a lot about this one in our last video, which I'll link up atop, but it was really good. It's a slower start. It's a very long book. I want to say it was 9 or 10 hours, but it was so informative about the area, about Holland, about customs, about the way people lived. Now, again, this is a book that has some words in it we don't use today. Things like the dad who has a brain injury is called stupid, or a few other words. So you have to kind of be prepared to deal with that. But overall, the story is really good. We watched Disney's movie they made of it, I think in the 70s. And it's quite a different story. It was still a good movie. It was okay, but quite a different story. But I highly recommend the book. I'm going to try and get a copy of the book, or possibly we may just listen to it again because it's long. But such great information about the area and about history in that area. And then we've moved on to Jukebox Joyride by Jacob Stein, and I believe he's the narrator on it as well. And we're probably about a third of the way through this. And so far, everyone's really enjoying it. It has a lot of music in it. It reminded me of the book Echo, but even more music and a little bit more modern music. My kids find it really funny. They enjoy it. My husband and I are enjoying it, so we'll see how it ends, and then I'll kind of share a little bit more. But it's basically about a family who the uncle is a music ethnologist, I can't say the word, but he studies the history of music, and he vanishes one day. And the kids have to try and find him and solve this mystery, which may or may not include some time travel and some really neat musical aspects to it. So then, that brings us to the kids. The only book I assigned my kids to read my two oldest, Josh and Ty, was the one Christmas in the Big House, Christmas in the Quarters by Patricia McKizak. And I wanted them to read that along with one of the units on the slavery that we were doing and the slave trade in our Story of the World. It just talks about Christmas and the contrast really between the two, and life on plantation. So that was the only one I assigned them to read. And then the kids read Minecraft, Pokemon, superhero, and they also read the rest of the Rust series. They read books 2, which is called Secrets of the Cell, book 3, Death of the Rocket Boy, and number 4, Soul in the Machine. And then apparently there's a prequel which they're trying to get, but they really enjoyed the Rust series. My husband read them all too, and they all really enjoyed that. Other than that, just a lot of kind of books. I haven't been the best at keeping track of them, so hopefully next month I'll have a better detailed update for you. And my daughter continues to read like early readers. She really likes kind of the fairy and princess books, as well as things like the Canadian Reader that we have on Cherry Street, ones like that. And then for me, so I finished reading Inside the OBriens by Lisa Genova, about a cop who develops Huntington's disorders, or has Huntington's disorder or disease, which is hereditary. And it kind of goes into this whole question of how it impacts and affects a person's life, particularly someone who is a cop, who's an officer, as well as the life of his family, because there's a chance his children have it, and grandchildren. And do you get tested? Do you wait for symptoms to come up? A whole lot of kind of ethical questions. There was some swearing in it, which I didn't really care for. But otherwise, it was a really good story. Very, very interesting. Kind of made you think, if you knew there was a chance that you had a disease that would eventually kill you, would you want to know ahead of time? Interesting to think about that question. And then I read Leave Me by Gail Foreman. This was an interesting book about a mom who has a heart attack and basically isn't able to recover. Everything is just kind of put right back on her, and she feels like she just can't escape. And so she literally escapes. She runs away from her life. And kind of through that space, she gains a bit of perspective. There was a few things in this book I was kind of like, or that could have been better, but it was a good story. And again, that question of what do you do when life's pressure is so much and you've had such a physical response, you need to heal, and you're not being given time or space to heal. How do you react? How do you deal with that? So really interesting. Let me know if you've read any of these books, and let me know your thoughts on them. And how do you deal with books that have words we no longer use, or concepts or ideas in them? Do you prefer not to read them to your kids? Do you prefer to edit them a bit? Or do you just have discussions about them? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, what you guys are reading right now. I love getting suggestions from you guys, because there's just so many awesome books out there that I've never heard of, and I want to hear about them. I hope this finds you having a great day. Take care.